Good morning, everyone, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. I am Ludovic Branlon, and I am the Nature-Based Solution Advisor at the Pacific Community based in New Caledonia at the headquarters. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this regional webinar for the launch of the Promoting Nature-Based Solution in the Pacific report. First, please let me begin by expressing my sincere thanks to New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, MFAT, whose flexible support through the Climate Change and Co-Investment made this report possible. Your strategic investment in this work has enabled us to take a significant step forward in understanding the landscape of nature-based solutions in the Pacific. I also want to take a minute to warmly thank all of those who contributed their time, knowledge, but also insight through the development of this report. The consultant from EcoConsulting, who led the process with professionalism and regional sensitivity, the many project stakeholders, country representatives, organizations, and practitioners who engaged through interviews and consultation, and most importantly, our colleagues from the Nature-Based Solution Working Group of the Pacific Island Roundtable, a diverse and passionate group of experts from across the region. Without the contribution and collective intelligence of our Nature-Based Solution Working Group members, many of whom are with us today, this report simply would not exist. And your input shaped both the direction and the depth of the final product. And I thank you all sincerely for that. As a co-chair of this working group, alongside IUCN and SPREP, we commissioned this review to respond to a clear regional need, to understand where we currently stand on NbS, what's already happening on the ground, and how we can better coordinate, support, and scale these efforts going forward. Despite the growing momentum around nature-based solutions, there was no consolidated overview of how, where, and to what extent these solutions are being implemented across the region. And this report helps fill that gap. It highlights both the diversity and richness of ongoing initiative and the common challenges we face as a region, while offering a foundation of evidence to inform action, investment, and policy. The Pacific Island Roundtable for Nature Conservation, the PIRT, plays a vital role as a voluntary coordination and partnership platform that brings together regional and international organizations, civil society, donors, and government partners who are committed to advance biodiversity conservation and sustainable development across the Pacific. It supports the implementation of the Pacific Framework for Nature Conservation and Protected Area, and provides a space for collaboration, knowledge sharing, and alignment across initiative. And within this structure, the NbS Working Group was created to promote coordination, shared learning, and greater uptake of NbS at all levels. This report we're going to present today stands as a key deliverable of that group. It provides a snapshot of where we are, what is working, and where the gaps remain, and it sets out a series of practical recommendations. It is both a technical resource, but as well a strategic tool, one that we hope will guide future planning and implementation. And this report is particularly relevant to the region for three main reasons. First, because it provides the most comprehensive stocktake to date of NbS intervention in the Pacific, with more than 100 projects reviewed across 18 countries and territories, which give us a solid evidence base to build from. Second, it identifies the key enablers and barriers we collectively face, from the need for integrated policy and finance mechanism to the importance of capacity building, inclusive participation, and traditional knowledge. And third, it offers forward-looking recommendations that align with the core priorities of our region: resilience, sustainability, sovereignty, and people-centered development. As you can see on the screen now, the full report is officially available today, and you are invited to use the QR code on your screen to get access to it. And I strongly encourage you to download it, explore it, and share it across your networks. Now let's have a look at the agenda. Today's session has two main objectives. First, to present the synthesis of findings and key recommendations from the report, but also to provide a space for dialogue and reflection through a panel discussion. To achieve this, we will begin with opening remarks from Mrs. Lucy Jacob, Senior Advisor for Pacific Ocean and Fisheries at MFAT, followed by a presentation of the report synthesis and key recommendation from Claire Wingfield from EcoConsulting. And we will then move into a panel discussion featuring a wide range of perspectives from across the region, including donors, project implementers, academics, youth representatives, and civil society actors. This panel will reflect on how the report's findings align with on-the-ground realities, what kind of support and collaboration are needed, and how we can work more effectively together as a Pacific NbS communities. Throughout the agenda, we will also be using Mentimeters to gather your reflection and question, and we will close with some remarks on where we go from here. We will also be able to take some questions from the audience via the chat box, or you invited to raise your hand when we will have the Q&A session following the panel discussion. So thanks again for your presence today, and most importantly for the work you all do to advance nature-based solutions across our Blue Pacific. I look forward to the discussion ahead. But before we begin, let me briefly introduce Mrs. Lucy Jacob, who's going to open this webinar. Lucy helps to design and manage projects that have positive climate and ocean outcomes for the Pacific region. Prior to joining MFAT, Lucy worked for WWF New Zealand, supporting efforts to safeguard New Zealand's ocean resources, and worked at NIWA to manage a large-scale climate adaptation program in New Zealand. Lucy spent also 6 years in the Samoa and American Samoa, supporting efforts to develop marine protected area from the bottom up and helping to build regional capacity for MPA implementation. She also has experience working in a range of other contexts, including the Indian Ocean and Bangladesh. Lucy, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and it's over to you now.
Talofa, Nisabula, Ali'i, Kiorana, Maloalele, Tena, Koto Katoa. It's a privilege to welcome you to today's panel discussion on nature-based solutions in the Pacific. I'd like to thank all of those of you that have been involved in the development of this holistic report, capturing the diverse representation and recommendations for nature-based solutions across the Pacific. The Pacific Islands are home to vibrant cultures and incredible biodiversity, yet they face profound environmental challenges. From rising sea levels to ecosystem degradation, the urgency to act has never been greater. Nature-based solutions, or NbS, offer a powerful integrated approach to resilience, rooted not only in Western ecological science, but also in the traditional practices and knowledge of Pacific communities. The invitation to provide these opening remarks caused me to reflect on my own experience working in the marine management sector. Throughout my working life, I've witnessed the challenges as well as the opportunities facing communities who are attempting to live within the bounds of what nature can provide. In the Pacific, 90% of the population live near the coast. People depend on marine and coastal ecosystems to support their families, their livelihoods, cultural identity, and of course also to enable adaptation to the many challenges being faced, which include climate impacts and the increasing impacts of natural disasters. I recently watched David Attenborough's Ocean documentary, and if you haven't had the opportunity to see this yet, I recommend looking out for it. One of the key themes of the film is that when given the opportunity to regenerate, nature often recovers quickly from the impacts of human activities. There are many examples of this on land and at sea. In the Pacific, communities have practiced these concepts such as rāui, bull, rāhui, or tabu areas for thousands of years, often for cultural reasons or for food security purposes. However, with the significant pressures facing coastal and marine areas now, it's clear that we need to strengthen the scope and the scale of solutions to allow nature to continue to support communities. These actions should be locally led and supported when necessary by partners who can provide both technical and financial support. This report highlights some of the opportunities that global policies and frameworks offer, as well as some of the potential financing solutions. And as one example today, I wanted to draw your attention to the Niue Ocean-wide initiative, a fantastic nationally led concept for Niue to enable long-term protection of biodiversity, whilst also supporting local communities through business generation, education, community grants, and lots more. Niue is doing this through its innovative financing mechanism that allows people to sponsor 1 kilometre squared of Niue's ocean waters for 20 years. investments from a range of donors are pooled to help Niue achieve its vision for a climate-resilient, sustainable blue economy that reinforces long-term ocean conservation. And New Zealand's proud to be a supporter of Niue Ocean-wide, known as NOW, and I encourage you to look at the model for inspiration. So as we delve into the report's insights today, we do this in the context of accelerating impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. The world is looking for solutions, and many of these may be found in nature. The Pacific is showing the way. By blending traditional knowledge with scientific innovation, communities are building resilience from the ground up. And I'm proud to work for the New Zealand government, where we support a range of locally led terrestrial and ocean-based solutions, and we work to amplify Pacific leadership for NbS. This report makes a range of recommendations. I encourage you to review these and to consider what part you want to play in implementing them. Thanks to the organisers, the report writers, the panel members, and also, as Ludo said, to all the communities and practitioners that are implementing NbS. This report, as noted, was made possible by the hard work of those funded through SPC's Climate Change Flagship Programme. New Zealand is pleased to be an anchor contributor to this integrated and flexible way of working within SPC. I'd like to leave you with this traditional Māori proverb, which I know is similar to many proverbs across the Pacific. Toi tū te marae a tāne mahuta, toi tū te marae a Tangaroa, toi tū te tangata. If the land is well and the sea is well, the people will thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for your inspiring words, for being with us today, and for your support for the development of this report. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, Lucy. I will now hand over to Claire Wingfield, who is the lead author of this fantastic report, working for the EcoConsulting. ECO is an international climate finance and sustainable development consultancy. We've been supporting and guiding clients to achieve low-carbon, climate-resilient development for 25 years. And Claire is a climate finance consultant with extensive experience in financial services and climate change. She has led the development of projects for clients such as the Green Climate Fund, GCF, GGI, and the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, with a successful history of managing international teams to mobilize significant funding for climate action worldwide. So I now leave the floor to you, Claire, to guide us through the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ludo, and a very good morning to you all. It's a real pleasure to be here presenting the key insights from this report to you this morning. I'm going to take you through how we compiled the report and some of the methodologies we used to garner the various insights, and then I'm going to go through and take you through some of the key findings and recommendations across the main sections of the report. So to start with, just to let you know how we developed the report, the insights are drawn from the analyses of 2 years of projects. As Ludo mentioned, these were across the years 2022 to 2024, taking projects shared with us by the Pacific Island Roundtable, NbS Working Group, and various other stakeholders. So we screened those and we screened those for projects that use natural systems and processes to address biodiversity, social and climate challenges. We also interviewed 30 participants, many who I can see have joined here today, so thank you for coming along. So we interviewed those participants across the region, and those included regional and national actors, those implementing projects, donors, researchers, and academics and governmental representatives. And finally, we carried out a thorough literature review of over 130 relevant publications across the same time period. So before we delve into those key findings, I just want to take a moment to share what is meant by nature-based solutions. And I think most of you will probably know the most widely known definition that has been developed by IUCN, which defines NbS as actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems to provide human well-being and biodiversity benefits while addressing societal challenges effectively and adaptively. And while this NbS definition may be relatively new, the IUCN definition was developed in 2012, the concept of working with nature is innate within the cultures of the people of the Pacific Islands, and it's deeply rooted in the traditional practices and ecological knowledge of Pacific communities. So for this reason, context-specific adaptations are particularly important. Stakeholder interviews revealed that while practitioners frequently reference those ICN definitions and guidelines, many of them adapted them during the implementation phase or built on them to develop context-specific standards. And they highlighted that there is a need for flexibility in global NbS frameworks to address local challenges and integrate traditional and Indigenous knowledge. At the time of writing this report, the development of Pacific-specific guidelines was under development with the guidance of IUCN, and that was part of the PIPIN project, known as Promoting Pacific Island Nature-Based Solutions, and you can read more about that in the report. So just now to show you some analyses from those 124 projects that we analysed. Climate adaptation was the primary focus of those projects. Over 52% of the projects were relating to adaptation. This reflects the high vulnerability to climate risks in the region and the need to reduce those. 20% of the projects were related to mitigation, and the remaining were on supporting measures. Over $90 million was mobilised for NbS projects in the Pacific over that period, the study period 2022 to 2024. And they supported diverse initiatives across agriculture, marine, coastal, urban, and water resources sectors. Climate funding for the NbS, meanwhile, is comparatively low, considering that the Pacific region manages the largest marine areas of all SIDS, and only 36% of climate finance for NbS went to the Pacific region out of SIDS as a whole. As hopefully you can see on your screens, not too small, from the chart on the right, there is a predominance of those NbS projects being applied to coastal, marine and forestry sectors, while freshwater and urban ecosystems have the fewest projects. And our literature review also highlighted gaps in research, particularly regarding water resources management. This figure here shows the distribution of projects across the region geographically, and you can see that it's geographically pretty uneven. And again, this was supported by the literature review that we conducted. The highest number of projects were found in Fiji, Vanuatu, and the Solomon Islands, and there were fewer projects in countries like Kiribati and Tuvalu. What does link projects across these countries, though, is their high climate vulnerability and their connection to marine environments, strong community governance, traditional knowledge, customary land tenure, with challenges of remoteness and limited government capacity. So here you can see some screenshots of what you can find in the report, and we organised it into various chapters covering latest research trends, implementation updates across 5 sectors, and I'll explain that a bit further on. And we had some overarching themes in capacity building, policy mainstreaming, finance, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So before I go into some of the key recommendations of some of those chapters, it's worth highlighting some overarching messages. These include the fact that many projects have a strong community orientation, with over a third of projects analysed focusing on marginalised groups such as women, youth, and Indigenous communities. This demonstrates that local ownership is critical for the sustainability of NbS initiatives, since communities deeply understand their unique ecosystems and the social context of those projects. As I mentioned earlier, there is limited research specifically focused on the Pacific Islands, and it's geographically uneven at the moment. Gaps include water resource management, forest restoration, agriculture, DRR, or disaster risk reduction, and the link between Indigenous ecological knowledge and scientific knowledge. And lastly, there are diverse interpretations of the NbS concepts, and that leads to challenges in monitoring efforts and measuring effectiveness. Global NbS frameworks often overlook Indigenous knowledge systems and require context-specific adaptations to respect the Pacific way of community engagement. So now I will go into some of the key recommendations. Firstly, traditional knowledge was consistently highlighted from the stakeholders that we spoke to as a critical element for the successful implementation of NbS in the Pacific. There is a real need and a significant opportunity that goes with that to integrate traditional knowledge with modern science knowledge to enhance the effectiveness of NbS. This ensures that it's socially and culturally appropriate and locally relevant, but also can help to increase the impact, particularly from an adaptation perspective. So we have included a few case studies in the report. There's a sea grape project, for example, that's been included as a case study, and it really is a good example of this, demonstrating how scientific data and traditional practices can be mutually beneficial, informing local decision-making and sustainable management. Meanwhile, projects like the Inspire project, also found in the report, and a community-led mangrove restoration project in Fiji, highlight that while traditional knowledge is valuable, communities also benefit from guidance and training in traditional and in technical aspects to improve effectiveness. GEDC was also a critical cross-cutting theme in NbS that features throughout the report, and we've threaded several examples of NbS initiatives in the Pacific that actively celebrate the voice of women, young people, and people with disabilities, ensuring their Indigenous knowledge and unique perspectives are integrated. The Kiwa Initiative and SPREP, for instance, are leading efforts to integrate GEDC into climate adaptation strategies and are developing micro-qualification frameworks with modules specifically focused on gender equality, social inclusion, and traditional knowledge. The MyCoast Initiative, from which one of our panelists, Martin Romain, is from, and you'll hear from later, that initiative actively promotes GEDC principles, ensuring that everyone is included in decision-making and awareness sessions. Nevertheless, there are still gaps in the research concerning the gender dimensions of NbS and the crucial role of women. One key recommendation going forward is to explicitly design and monitor GEDC integration within all NbS activities, ensuring that women, youth, and people with disabilities are not just participants, but leaders in both knowledge and practice. So within the report, you'll see there is an NbS implementation chapter. This is really the heart and soul of the report, and it's been divided into 5 sectors. So we have covered marine and coastal, and also forestry and land use, which covers all the ecosystems from the ridge down to the reef. We've got agriculture, which covers food security, urban covering habitation, and infrastructure, and water covering water security and freshwater resources. However, there is much overlap, and assigning an NbS type to a sector is therefore rarely clear-cut and has been quite difficult to achieve. However, the concept that you see that we've sort of developed on the right of the slide there is a conceptual model that helps us to show this and show the interactions between them and the overlap between them. But real NbS happens when the NbS intervention is co-created by those the project seeks to benefit, to support a goal that is defined by those involved. So within each sector of the report, you'll find more details on these different types of interventions, examples of types of NbS that fall within those sectors, and their associated challenges and opportunities. So do please go in and read those sections as they are of interest to your various lines of work. The capacity building chapter includes information on different types of capacity building. This covers from community engagement through to the necessary skills and knowledge that needs to be developed, and institutional capacity that needs to go with that. It also provides detail on the different role of different stakeholder groups, including donors, governments, NGOs, academia, and the private sector, and how they can work together in collaborative networks, helping to facilitate knowledge exchange for successful NbS implementation. Blending traditional wisdom with modern science, as I mentioned earlier, also requires building technical capacity to support that. So, for instance, a coastal community facing rising sea levels needs more than just mangrove restoration techniques. They also need to comprehend areas such as climate scenarios and modelling, ecosystem dynamics, and human nature interactions. And this will help them support long-term adaptable solutions. So training should not just focus on developing those specific activities to meet the project demands, but also capacities needed in financial management, monitoring, evaluation, governance, and GEDC approaches that goes hand in hand to create a holistic project. The interview showed that capacity building needs to be tailor-made, and platforms for sharing knowledge and lessons learned are fundamental tools. To achieve sustainable capacity building, it's crucial to provide both non-formal and formal structures that ensure long-term institutional backing for developing human and social capital. Mainstreaming NbS into policies is important for addressing climate change and biodiversity conservation. And while this is being increasingly recognised, we found that on-the-ground implementation lags behind ambition. We scanned many national plans and policies. We've summarised those in the report. They often include nature-based elements, but many do not directly reference NbS, the specific NbS terminology. So key recommendations on the policy side include strengthening national policy instruments by aligning them with global biodiversity targets, and adopting a holistic whole of governance and cross-sectoral approach with a coordinating body. Enhancing collaboration and coordination across government sectors, building capacity within governments to understand the interconnectedness of NbS, and improving awareness and political buy-in through advocacy and public diplomacy were all key recommendations that came through in this section. On the finance side, we're seeing a diverse range of financial mechanisms being used for NbS. These predominantly feature in the form of grants and philanthropy at the moment, but we're also seeing examples of equity and nature-linked bonds and loans. Innovative financing is being explored with various financial mechanisms, including outcome-based financing, like payment for ecosystem services, and we have a case study of that in the finance chapter. Debt for nature swaps, which haven't yet been implemented in the region but are being explored, and blue bonds, and we saw the first sovereign blue bond issued in Fiji in 2023. Nevertheless, access to climate finance remains a significant challenge due to the complex application processes and stringent criteria that often make it challenging to complete large sort of funding proposal applications, for example. And longer term funding cycles are critical as nature-based solutions take time to yield full impact, and often the funding cycles aren't long enough to fulfill the full life cycle of a nature-based solutions project. In terms of some case studies we've got in the report, we've got a GCF Samoa payment for ecosystem services project, as I just alluded to, that has some really good lessons learned, and they had difficulties meeting certification requirements of various carbon standards, and the small land parcels of the Samoa land posed challenges. Parceling or combining land to get economies of scale for VCM or voluntary carbon market projects can help overcome these challenges. And organisations such as SPREP in Fiji are working with governments on land tenure arrangements to make this easier. We also included a case study on the Nakao programme, which develops carbon projects, ensuring the rights of Indigenous peoples are taken into account. So again, I hope you find those case studies useful, and do go ahead and find them to have a look in your own time. And finally, on the monitoring and evaluation side, several participants in this study emphasised how monitoring timeframes should align with critical socio-ecological processes to ensure effective M&E. Often, those monitoring timeframes just aren't long enough to see the benefits of NbS, and the funding that goes hand in hand with that is really needed to lengthen that. As such, there is also a call for more participatory development to build a shared understanding of what is deemed effective in terms of NbS projects. Effective data management systems and cross-sectoral coordination mechanisms are essential here, requiring dedicated capacity building and resources. And there are examples of projects that are digitising traditional knowledge, for example, that we have included in the report, including the Sea Grapes project that was mentioned earlier. And finally, technologies like drones and satellite imagery can help overcome geographical monitoring challenges, and regional knowledge sharing platforms can accelerate learning in this space. Okay, so there's a lot packed into the report, but each of the chapters include a summary of the key insights and recommendations for you to easily navigate and find the information you need. So I hope that's been useful for you, just to give you a snapshot of what you can find in there. We hope you find it helpful and useful, and we hope that you see it as a call to action for concerted collaborative effort in this space. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Claire, for leading the development of this report with all your great team, and as well for your patience in addressing all the comments that we have through the course of the development of the report, and for providing this overview of the report. Thank you so much, Claire. Again, if you have any question about this presentation or to Claire specifically or myself, feel free to write them down in the chat box and we will address them following our panel discussion, or wait for the Q&A session so that you can raise your hand and take the floor if you have any question. As you can see, the report is rich, as highlighted by Claire. So the idea is for you to get access to it and to look at the sections that are of your interest. So you can find the useful information in there. So before I hand over to Ellie to facilitate the panel discussion, let me quickly introduce our lovely panelists who agreed to be with us today before we give the floor to them. So first, I'm very happy to welcome Lorraine Sivo, is an experienced environmental management professional and currently the project manager of the Payback Plus project at SPREP under the Kiwa initiative. Then we have Dr. Maybrit Pedersen-Zeri, Associate Professor at the Auckland University of Technology in the School of Future Environments. We also have, as mentioned by Claire, Martin Roman is a regional project manager for the MICOS project from OneReef Worldwide Stewardship, a multi-country initiative also under the Kiwa initiative. Then we have Sesimani Lokoti. Very nice to have you with us, Sesimani. Sesimani is a national coordinator for the UNDP Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program based in Tonga, among other hats that she has. And last but not least, we are very happy to have Dave Lobser, currently working with the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade as their implementation lead on nature-based solution. And we have Ellie, who's going to facilitate this panel discussion from ECO team. Ellie is a marine and coastal ecologist by background, a senior consultant and part of the ECO team. She's a facilitator and as well as providing technical consultancy, also delivers and facilitates training on a range of climate finance topic. So over to you, Ellie, and to our wonderful panelists. And thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Ludo, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to our panelists. This is where we really get to get our teeth into some of those findings of the report and talk about all things NbS across the Pacific and your own personal experiences. Before we kind of get into that, I'd love to hear from all of our panelists just to let everyone, all of our audience know who you are and through the lens of nature-based solutions and perhaps how you connect to NbS through your work. So I'm going to start with Lorraine, handing over to you just to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ellie. And, I just want to say Bulavinaka, like Ludo had mentioned, a warm Pacific greetings to you all. Firstly, I'd like to just extend my sincere thanks to SPC for the invitation to be part of this important panel discussions on NbS. It's a real pleasure to be here amongst you colleagues and also practitioners who share the same commitment to the cause of NbS. My name, as mentioned before, is Lorraine Sivo. I'm the project manager for Payback Plus initiative, which basically stands for Pacific Ecosystem-Based Adaptation to Climate Change, implemented by SPREP in partnership with 5 countries, and that is Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Wallis and Futuna. And the Solomon Islands through the Kiwa initiative funding. Over the course of my career, I've worked across the spectrum of environmental conservation, biodiversity protection, and also climate change adaptation. And just more recently, my focus has sort of deepened into the practical implementations of NbS solutions. For me personally, what I've learned across all these areas is that communities are always at the heart, whether we're protecting ecosystems, we're restoring landscape, or building resilience to climate change. And even though the approach may be different for us that work in this space, the principle remains, which is really, community leadership, its cultural relevance, and just the knowledge exchange, which are essentials for the lasting impact for the work that we do on the ground. So, as I'll be sharing more about my experiences on project implementation, working with communities on the ground, I'm also looking forward to today's discussion, just to learn from you all and also share thoughts and lessons learned as we work towards achieving the role of NbS, as a tool for climate change resilience across our Pacific countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm handing over to Maybrick. Would you introduce yourself and your connection with nature-based solutions?
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora everybody, my name's Maybrick Peterson-Zari. I'm an associate professor at the School of Future Environments at Auckland University of Technology, which is in New Zealand, Aotearoa. And my background is architecture and urban design. I was running the NuWAL research project. NuWAL stands for Nature-Based Urban Design for Wellbeing and Adaptation in Oceania. And our focus was on Indigenous knowledge-led climate adaptation, working with nature, and sort of a different way of approaching that, which had a sense of justice at its core, I suppose. I'm also involved in various nature-based solutions things internationally, particularly related to cities and urban systems. I'm an academic, so I do a lot of writing about things and teaching about things. And I suppose finally I'm working with a team of people, including Dave, who's here on the panel, to put together teaching materials and run a pilot course for Pacific-wide micro-qualification in nature-based solutions, and that's funded by SPC through Kiwa. Kia ora.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Maybrick. And already we're seeing the diversity in our stakeholders here. Handing over to Sesamani. Thank you so much for being here, Sesamani. How are you today? Please introduce yourself to the group with your connection to nature-based solutions.
Malolele, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well. My name is Sesamani and I'm based out of Tonga Tapu in the Kingdom of Tonga. My involvement with nature-based solution usually revolves around working with or working for local communities. There's a concept of Indigenous people, and whereas in Tonga, we're not as much of a fruit bowl as everywhere else in the Pacific, but we are getting there. So for us, everyone is Indigenous. So for the distinction between IPL and local communities, well, that for Tonga doesn't really work out that way. So everyone is Indigenous and everyone is with local communities. Hence the many roles that I play with local communities when it comes to project implementation. Now with Tonga, due to the remoteness of everything else, everything is pushed towards nature-based solutions, or at least we're gunning for nature-based solution and the promotion of nature-based solution with local communities and project implementation, mainly for the revival of traditional knowledge that these local communities are starting to lose hold, it's starting to erode away with the income of the more convenient approaches to livelihood, but also because traditional livelihoods in our small islands is pretty much nature-based solution in itself. But again, as the report had highlighted, there's a lack of documentation around it, hence why we can't, how do you say it? We cannot say with confirmation in the scientific community that has always been there. So I am looking forward to a very fruitful discussion with this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sesamani. Martin, why are you here? What's your connection with nature-based solutions?
Hi, Ellie. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Romain. Today, I serve as the project manager at OneReef for the Kiwa Initiative Regional MICOS project, which stands for Micronesia Community-Based Fisheries Management as a Nature-Based Solution for Coastal Resilience. This project spans across 4 countries: Palau, Marshall Islands, Nauru, and the Federal Sister of Micronesia, specifically the states of Yap, Pohnpei, and Kosrae, which really provides us a great variety of contexts and realities. So through this work, I've started to see firsthand how community-based fisheries management and other alternative livelihoods function as nature-based solutions. And I'm really excited to share some of those lessons learned and illustrations with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. And last but definitely not least, Dave, a representative of the donor community. What's your in a short nutshell, what's your connection with nature-based solutions?
Good morning, Ellie. Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name's Dave Loebser. I work with the team here at Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, New Zealand government. I'm the climate change and biodiversity implementation lead in the team here. And I've been working on nature-based solutions for over 20 years. Now, I know the definition only came out in 2012, but I've been working on what could be considered nature-based solutions for the last 20 years before the term was even widely used. I've worked primarily in my early years in the forest carbon side of work, working on REDD+ projects in Africa, blue carbon projects in the Persian Gulf, and the New Zealand government's Kyoto carbon accounting and emissions trading schemes. In more recent years, I've been focusing on adaptation and specifically ecosystem-based adaptation. In a previous iteration of my life, I was working on the same project as Lorraine on the PBAC project in Vanuatu. My focus now is really on ecosystem-based adaptation with a focus on well-being and the recognition of traditional ownership and inclusivity. What I must stress is, whilst I am providing technical input to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, my views mentioned in this discussion do not necessarily reflect that of the ministries. So I just want to clarify that. So that's me in a nutshell. I think that's a small enough nutshell, and we'll hand back.
Thanks very much, Dave. And there is a 6th panelist in the room, and that is our audience. So we're using, as Ludo mentioned, we're going to use our Mentimeter for us to really get a flavor of who is in the room. And just for us to kind of take a moment perhaps to really appreciate that it's all of the recommendations and findings of the report and the gaps and the priorities that we're going to talk about today. It's no one of us is going to do these things. It's taking all of us as a community. So once you've found your way into the Mentimeter, the first couple of questions are just to really understand who we are. And all of us as individuals have our unique makeup of skills and experience, and we're all working in different areas. And I understand there's probably plenty of you in this room that are also just interested human beings in understanding more about nature-based solutions. But if you do take the little slider on when you find the Mentimeter form, and you just see which ones of these areas, whether you're working with nature-based solutions on the ground, community activities, whether you're involved in developing and designing projects, capacity building and training, not just raining, gender equality, disability and social inclusion, the JEDC, the monitoring, evaluation and learning. Are there many researchers or academics in the room? We spoke to quite a few in the production of our report. They're very busy. Some of them aren't here today, but we do have a lot of people involved in development and design of projects. That's great. We have quite a lot of people involved in policy and also in financing as well. So that's great as we get up to 33 responses. We're getting a flavour of who our community is here. Actually, that capacity building and training line is going up more, but there is probably a predominance here of people designing projects. But none of us are one thing, right? We're complex human beings, and we're all part of this greater community. So I'm going to ask the panelists this question, and I'm inviting all of you today to reflect on Claire's presentation. How do the report's findings and recommendations resonate with your own experience? So whilst I ask the panelists their own reflections, please do add yours in here, and we'll come back to them at the end of each round of questions. So, panelists, Martin, was there any of those findings and recommendations that you found particularly resonant with your own experience?
Many of them, yes, but one I'd like to share today, one of these recommendations that really strongly resonated with me and the work that I'm involved in is the effect, the design, implementation and monitoring of nature-based solution in the Pacific must reflect the region's ecological, cultural, and social realities. This was absolutely aligned with our experience with the MICOS project. In our case, project partners were working to integrate two important aspects. The first, the nature-based solution global standard, and the second, the Pacific framework for action on scaling up community-based fisheries management. And that was specifically trying to integrate this into their project intervention. Now, for this to be truly meaningful and really to take root, we really had to contextualize the frameworks, specifically for the Micronesia region. While CBFM is a shared goal across Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia, we found that the path to achieving it actually looked different in each of the sub-region, mostly because it's shaped by their unique governance structure, community structure, and traditional knowledge. The second thing that we really found interesting, and it's part of the recommendations, was also to introduce the nature-based solution criteria to partners and all other relevant stakeholders early in the project process. For MICOS specifically, we worked closely with all the partners to use these criteria at the onset. This was not only for the design portion, but also prioritized in the implementation phase, particularly to guide decision-making through that implementation phase. So currently, it is currently primarily facilitated by the project management unit, meaning that we run through some of those criteria with the partners, but partners are actually continue demonstrating that they use those criteria in the implementation decision that they're making. I'm happy to provide quite a few examples. For us, ultimately, this helped build ownership rather than resistance, and really avoided the pitfall of suddenly imposing an external standard midstream. Now, looking ahead, I'd like to maybe offer a couple of areas of priorities, specifically in relation to some of those recommendations. The first is to ensure that local definition of success and resilience shape how nature-based solutions are designed and measured. And the second, that I find quite important, is supporting long-term local capacity so that communities and their partners are not just implementers, but they are leaders and primary owners of their nature-based solution efforts. Thank you for the opportunity, Ali.
Thanks, Martin. I saw a couple of nodding heads there. Maybrick, I know, what, in your view, are the priorities here for NbS, for communities and the environment? Over to you.
Yes, kia ora. I think a lot of the priorities or the findings that were outlined in the report make sense. There are a couple of things that I would just kind of maybe strengthen or highlight, and I think it picks up a little bit on maybe what Martin was just saying, but there's an opportunity for people to see nature-based solutions as a vehicle for actually increasing community well-being rather than just a kind of a technical approach to whatever, climate change adaptation or something like that. Because I think it's important to ask ourselves the question, what are we actually adapting for if it's not to support the well-being of the community? So asking people, what does make a good life is central. And I think it's not just about kind of integrating traditional knowledge with Western science, but enabling local values and priorities and worldviews to shape and to really lead projects. And that kind of leads me to another point that the Oceania is in a situation where there's a lot of donor aid coming in from other places, particularly Europe, as well as New Zealand and Australia, I suppose. And if there's a shift that could occur from thinking about the Pacific as this really vulnerable place and sort of the polar bears of the world, you know, the victims in climate change, to actually understanding that Pacific peoples have always been incredibly resilient, living in these very dynamic island ecosystems, and actually have a lot to teach the rest of the world about nature-based solutions, you know, whatever you want to call them. So I think if there's a slight shift in kind of attitude with how we approach designing nature-based solutions to kind of be underpinned by community empowerment as well as well-being, then that would be amazing. And that does occur in some projects, but it's certainly something I would love people to read about and understand. And later I can give some examples of some of these traditional systems if that's wanted.
Absolutely, Maybrick, and you're getting a lot of appreciation in the audience as well. It's resonating with other people, and as well with some of the things that people are putting in the Mentimeter. Lorraine, in your experience and implementation, you know, are any of these findings things that you also would recommend or resonate with you? Sorry, Lorraine, you're muted.
Thank you, Ellie, for the questions. To me, from my experience and having to work with communities on the ground for so long, I think the one recommendation that I sort of really resonate well with is the one on the nature-based concept. That basically highlights, you know, that NbS should reflect on regions' ecological, cultural, and social characteristics. I say this because I believe, you know, that in the Pacific, not only is traditional knowledge is important, but it's also the traditional practices. Yes, so hence to me, NbS approaches really should be community-driven. And it must also be, you know, locally designed, and it should be grounded on land tenure systems and or customary resource ownership. For us in the Pacific, you know, the land and the sea are really under some kind of customary ownership. And so this means that any intervention must sort of respect those ownership systems and be shaped by the knowledge, you know, also the priorities, and most importantly, the leadership of the local resource custodians. For example, you know, in Fiji and in the Solomon Islands, in terms of how we've implemented our project, we've found that restoration activities were far more successful when implemented through land-owning units, rather than through a general village level approach. Why? Simply because, you know, the land-owning units to us, we felt that they had more direct responsibilities and authorities over their land, which sort of leads to a deep engagement in their decision making. Also, there's more stronger commitments to monitoring, and also there's, you know, just better long-term stewardship. Also in one of our sites in Fiji, this approach that we've used not only strengthened the project success, it was also able to inspire other land owning units within the same village to sort of initiate their own restoration activities, and sort of creating rippling effects of interest and ownership. The second point, which I thought was also important, was that, NbS really should be recognizing how communities use and value their resources. We cannot assume that all communities across the Pacific will see the same value of a particular ecosystem, in terms of the intervention. So, for instance, if we were to make a sense of promoting mangrove restoration in a community that lives far inland and relies primarily on forest for their livelihood, their priority might be the interest on forest restoration, or maybe agroforestry or water management. And so with our projects, one of the things that we've done, we've basically been intentional in aligning NbS interventions with environment context and livelihoods needs for each of these communities, such as the mangrove restoration work or the coastal community, while we also work with the inland communities on reforestations of degraded area, or basically looking at sustainable farming practices. And so I'll just park that here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Super interesting, very pertinent. Dave, do you have any particular findings or recommendations that you think it's important to be highlighted to the audience?
Well, I think the one thing that's coming through very clearly from everyone so far is the importance of ownership, local ownership, community ownership. And I think, that for me, and I think, for the region, is probably the key focus that nature-based solutions needs to have, is around ownership and the people. So I'm not going to dwell on that particular one, because I think that's coming through very clearly. But one of the things that I've picked up in the work that I'm doing with the ministry is around the definition of what is nature-based solutions. I think there is a lack of consistency in understanding of what constitutes nature-based solutions. In the Pacific, people live very close to nature, which means that, in essence, they have been working with nature-based solutions for millennia. It's not something new to them. Whereas if you look at the standards that have been brought out by the IUCN and other organizations, they're very focused around nature-based solutions in a Western context, where people are a little bit more apart from nature. So I think the key thing, and it's something that we're working on at the ministry together with IUCN, is around making sure that we work on developing standards and a consistent understanding of those standards that is relevant for the Pacific. So I think just molding and altering those standards to a way that is better understood, that is consistently understood in the region. And again, we're not telling people how to go about things, because, as I said right at the beginning, people in the Pacific have been working on nature-based solutions for millennia. It's to work with the systems that they are used to and have worked on for all this time. So I think that's one of the key things for me, is that we come out of this process, and I talk about nature-based solutions being a process because it is an evolving science with a consistent understanding that is relevant to the people who are going to be working with it. Yeah, so that's the key thing for me. The last thing I'd like to just say is more around the report per se as a whole. is that it fills a very important role in that it is part of an extension of reports that have been done over the years. NIWA did a report back in 2019, I think it was, on the nature-based solutions in the Pacific at that particular time. WWF followed with another report more recently, building on that. And this is the next iteration of that, going into more depth and more detail. And I think this is an important evolution of seeing the growth of the science in the region and its importance to the region. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for highlighting those points. Sesamani, are you, is your internet connection okay to answer your priorities that you'd like to highlight to the group? Thank you.
Thank you. I think pretty much everyone in the panel has touched base a little bit here and there on what the priorities look like in the Pacific. But for Tonga, it's always going to be context. One thing we have realized working with community so far is that what may be defined in the Western context with its terminology is already being lived by many of our communities. So nature-based solution for us, it's not always a co-design. It's something that has always been there. As my other panelists have commented on, our approach in Tonga is a bit different, whereby we let the locals tell us what it looks like for them and how they want to go about it. And then we match it up with something that is already in, say, a standard or a framework to a Western concept, of course, what that looks like and what those definitions mean. So the approach is rather the tail is wagging the dog rather than the dog wagging the tail, if we're going to look at it from an academic or a scientific perspective. So therefore, it becomes quite hard for us to try and document it in a way that it will be peer reviewed and past being peer reviewed. But what is being highlighted and what is being voiced out by many of my colleagues on the panel is very true. What is most important for us in the Pacific is livelihood and how we live those livelihood on a daily basis, whether according to our context being inland or by coastal, is being defined by systems that were already there and are adapting to our climate changing. So nature-based solution in terms of design and implementation and adaptation will continue to do so, as many of our local communities are experiencing. However, to properly document the changes and the implementation work is to document livelihood. And we can't say document one shoe fits all for the Pacific, because it's not the same. Even in our tiny island home, the context is very different. As Lorraine has pointed out, mangroves can only exist in one part of the Pacific. For others, it may be a sandalwood, reforestation, anything else like that. However, the undermining all of them or underscoring the main importance is always going to be livelihood. And what that livelihood looks like per community across the islands is very, very different. But that perhaps has already been, many of it has been highlighted and recommended throughout the report. But I guess the linkages to livelihood defining and leading the way and paving the way for nature-based solutions in the Pacific needs to be really, really it needs to come through more, especially when we look at it from a scientific point of view. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, Sesamani, I think these are really great points, and I think we should, I could see some nodding at the top of my screen. I see Lorraine and I see Maybrick nodding. I'd like to carry on that in terms of some examples, but let's just go to the Mentimeter, because participants here who are our sixth panel member are also saying similar things. I mean, there's a lot of resonance in what's being said. There are some specific notes around the water side of things, but there's a lot of comments on community-led and driven, on working with local systems. And I think that was one of the parts that was highlighted in the report. I think, Sesemane, you make a really nice addition to the emphasis around livelihoods. But coming back to the next question, and then back to you guys, have you got any examples of how we can address these areas where there's perhaps there's a need, or there's a gap, or there's just a misunderstanding? And so asking the audience as well, but coming back to maybe Lorraine, you can start with maybe an example where a traditional practice is integrated, or being the primary driver in a nature-centered project of yours.
Yes, thank you, Ellie. I do have an illustration that I believe, sort of illustrates how things has worked well when we talked about the value of traditional knowledge and the importance of, regionally owned research and community-based monitoring. We've been working with a group of youth and women from a coastal community, where mangrove is literally part of their backyard. So the initial mangrove planting initiative was really basically designed to address two challenges that they were facing. One was really to reduce, sort of restore the original ecosystems, which had been degraded over time. And secondly was to sort of reduce the coastal erosion, which sort of had worsened due to the road development that was impacting the natural shoreline for this community. Yeah? So the community basically brought in traditional ecological knowledge to sort of guide the restoration effort, which included three things. One was the timing. The planting based on the mangrove seeds naturally fall off the tree. The second, I believe, was really avoiding planting during the cyclone seasons, when sort of seedlings are more likely to be damaged or sort of washed away. And the third was really using a local techniques for planting, such as the correct depth and sort of or the angle to ensure that there was proper anchoring of the seedlings when we were planting them. However, there were gaps in the technical knowledge around this for the communities. One was the site selection. They really didn't know whether to plant closer to the shoreline or sort of look at the site that was further out at low tide. The second point was, they didn't sort of have that understanding about the importance of the different substrate type, whether they needed a silky substrate, rocky or sandy, that was more suitable for the planting activity that they wanted to do. Thirdly, I think they also were not sure whether the planting that they were doing needed barriers to sort of protect the seedlings from wave actions. And also one was whether the single planting or the cluster type of planting was the right approach for them. So these were sort of the knowledge that sort of played, a pivotal role in what they were wanting to do. So through the exchanges and success stories, from other sites, the communities was able to adopt new practices and sort of, started setting up trials for them to observe, the different survival rates in terms of what they were trying to put out. So over time, they were basically able to refine their techniques and then just basically the improved outcomes of what they were trying to do. What was particularly inspiring was that, this group was able to go out and share their learnings to the nearby communities. They also became local champions on mangrove restoration work within their own district. And to me, this was really a good example of how, they've taken in traditional knowledge. They've also looked at science knowledge and sort of just basically came together and be able to, emphasize community-led monitoring to sort of look at the adaptive learning side of things. However, through the period that we've been doing this work, one of the things that I see would be a key challenge to this particular community is that, we continue in order to be able to sustain the work that they're doing. Someone had mentioned earlier in a comment and also in the discussion that mostly our NbS projects are usually short-term. But when we're talking about NbS and we're talking about long-term result, we really need to start looking at funding opportunities that can take into account long-term to allow ecological restorations and monitoring work to be able to really show the benefits of this. Yeah? And so communities are really eager to continue with the work that we've started, but without ongoing support, I see that there's a risk of these efforts losing transactions over time. Yeah? And so basically, for me, in my opinion, to address this, we've been exploring ways to work with the communities to locally available funding opportunities to support their own monitoring work and maintenance program. So there's also a need to sort of build better data systems at the community level, so we can be able to, really record evidence of success stories, and rather than just anecdotal information that's been shared, which is something that I see that lacks a lot in the Pacific region. Yeah.
Thanks, Sereni, for those points. Maybrick, I know you've worked a lot on traditional systems. Has anything sparked your awareness that you'd like to bring up from some of the other panelists, or have you got yourself an example you'd like to share with the greater audience?
Yes, thank you, Ellie. I first of all just want to pick up on something that Sisimani said and that Lorraine's picked up on, is that it's quite hard to document some of these projects and to publish them. And I think it's really important to try and do that kind of work, because when we can document how things have gone and not just the outcomes, but also the processes, that can lead to learning for other people nearby. But it's also really important to increase the impact of the work that's happening in the Pacific globally. So it is quite hard to do that. If anybody needs help with that kind of publishing or documenting of case studies, just get in touch with me and I'll try and help. There are other academics working in this area too. But what I just really want to say is that there's this really, really interesting and fascinating renaissance going on at the moment across Moananui. And, as people have pointed out, it's a very dynamic place, not everything's the same. But there's this renaissance in kind of a traditional or local way of creating these living systems that go right from ridge to reef, these socio-ecological systems that are interconnected ecologies, basically across scales and across time, that reflect worldviews. And I think, we need to shift how we kind of position ourselves as humans in the living world. So, for example, there's Ahupua'a in Hawaii, Va'amataina in Tahiti, Ta'apere even in the Cook Islands, Pākainga in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Fuaiala in Samoa. And these are large-scale systems. They're nature-based solutions for how people can live well in in their ecosystems. And some of this knowledge has been, I wouldn't say lost, but isn't being practiced anymore. And that's because of things like colonization in those nations that have experienced that, but also just because of globalization, industrialization, and that kind of thing. So in Hawaii, for example, the regeneration of the Ahupua'a systems is a bit further ahead than in some other places in Moananui. But it's an incredible renaissance that's going on. And I think that there's a lot to learn with planning these nature-based solutions from that traditional knowledge. So these are, very sophisticated island-wide systems. So if anybody's interested in that, I'll just put some more information about that in the chat.
Really interesting, Maybrick, and exciting. I can feel the excitement in your voice as you're speaking. And I have to comment on, doing the report was hard, because we knew that when we were counting, even in that slide you saw where we counted the number of projects, and that's not all the projects that are out there, and that's only a small subset of actually all, depending on the classification that we're working with. Kind of thinking about the findings and recommendations, and then on to kind of things that we can do, and things that have perhaps been even a challenge to address some of those findings and recommendations that we probably many of us already know about. I wonder if any of our panelists have any thoughts on any challenges and barriers and what is perhaps needed to overcome any challenges in implementing or supporting communities to yes, Dave, please go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt you there with the hand.
Oh, you took the baton. Take the baton.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges comes with at a government level. I think we are seeing, as Maybrit said, there is a renaissance in the region, and there is a greater understanding of what constitutes nature-based solutions. And I know that's a slight contradiction to my previous statement about no consistency, but there is an understanding in the region about nature-based solutions. And I believe an inherent desire to utilize nature-based solutions wherever possible in the region. However, I think, particularly at a government level, governments have been so ingrained with the development community telling them what to do that it's the default approach. Rather than taking that ownership, listening to communities. Someone mentioned in the chat about bottom up. I think that's vitally important, is that governments must be the spokesperson for the communities and talk with the donor communities about how they want the financing to be utilized. I know it's the usual story, but not everyone wants a seawall. Perhaps a mangrove or a hybrid solution would be a better solution. I think we've got to break that and not wishing to be undermining governments and communities, but there appears to be a level of confidence that the development community has possibly taken away from some of the governments in the region, where they are not as assertive in saying how they want things done. It's far too easy to take the money and build a seawall, rather than pushing back and saying, no, the community see this as the traditional way of protection. We want to follow that. So I think we've got to break that cycle of donor, government, community. I don't know how to go about it. I have no solution on how to go about it, other than we have to build capacity. We need the people on the ground at all levels to be able to impress upon the funders as to what they want, rather than what the funders think they should have.
Yeah, great point, Dave. And if we just turn back to the Mentimeter to see what the audience is also saying, and the question posed to the audience as you were providing those examples there and talking about some of those barriers, what's needed to address these NbS priorities. There's recognition of community nuances and differences in culture. A lot of people talking about long-term commitment, funding cycles perhaps not matching with ecosystem restoration, the importance of building from the bottom up, empowering locals with experience, giving more support, priorities there's a lot on the long-term needs versus the short-term cycles of things. So kind of bringing our conversations together and thinking about, how we can address some of these priorities and put into action some of these recommendations and findings. How can we as an NbS community work better together at all types of stakeholders in all different places in order to realize those greater benefits for people and for nature alike. So you may have some ideas of, pilots or collaborations or ways that we can work together more or share more. So I'd be interested in doing a quick round of all of you. I'm going to start with Sesamani because I haven't heard from you for a while. If you have any ideas and how collaboration could happen more.
Oh, wow. Well, for me, it's always to talk to people more. I completely understand where everyone else is saying. We can do it really well from grassroots to grass top. But once we hit bigger governance at national level, it's always going to be harder. However, what we're finding in Tonga is that if we just talk to each other more, instead of being isolated and working in silos, those barriers and those walls are just quite imaginary lines because we in Tonga are housed under one house. We may have separate rooms, but we can find doors to each other. So between my working area of implementation at local grassroots and grass tops, we can always talk to government on how we can better move forward. We can always talk to each other at regional, and I'm talking about Tongan regional level, at constituency to local MPs, on how we can better situate ourselves so that donor funding from abroad can directly impact to grassroots work. But the bottom line is just collaboration essentially is talking to one another. And we also do that at a regional level, like such forums as this. And if we can collaborate and talk to each other without judgment, and I understand that may be a bit hard for a lot, but having difficult conversations with each other and coming up with resolution is the best possible move forward in any context. And that essentially is my contribution to all of that. Just talk to each other. We're all reachable. Thanks to technology, we are all reachable, even with the distances. Thank you.
100%. It all comes down to relationships. Thank you, Sesamani. Martin.
Thank you, Ellie. I absolutely agree with the previous statement, and I'll surf on that wave for a minute because I have 3 suggestions that are somewhat similar. The first is stay informed. Second is stay involved and contribute. That's really a recommendation for everybody. And the third to me that I find is important is really to stay grounded. I would like to maybe describe those a little bit. First, stay informed is essentially what we're doing here is I found that the body of knowledge around nature-based solution is growing super rapidly. And I find that then it's essential that we remain up to date and not just in those global trends, but also in what is emerging needs and realities across the region. We have a lot of stakeholders to work with, from communities, NGOs, and governments, that we all need to stay connected to this evolving landscape so that we can align and I think adapt those approaches together. The second is really stay involved and contribute. We all have roles that we can play in building this movement. To me, that means that we have to actively participate in those forums. That means listen, be present, also speak up and share your thoughts, share what works and what doesn't work for you. And lastly, stay grounded. To me, that is the most important one. We need to ensure that our work stays grounded in the realities, the needs, and the knowledge of specific communities. primarily for me is to listen deeply and consistently so that communities, specifically to what communities are saying and what they're showing us, that is the essential part. As practitioners, I found that it is our collective responsibility to adapt our strategies based particularly on their local priorities and not the other way around. So again, stay informed, contribute, and stay grounded.
It's a really nice summary, Martin. And panel members, we are eating into our Q&A time, but if any of you three who I haven't asked this question would like to add to Sesamani's talk to one another and Martin's 3 points, please raise your hand. Perfect. Maybrick, please add. And Dave. Okay, let's do it all. Let's do it quickly. Let's get our bullet points.
Okay, I'll try and be really quick. Yeah, so the key things I want to say is that we're really in a crisis as humans on the planet. We do need to change the way we do things. And I think it varies across Oceania, but the connecting notions of kinship and relationship to nature that are present in the Pacific can really lead in that space. And those voices need to come through in planning nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are meaningful and political in this part of the world. Like, for example, where I'm from, if you are related to a river, if the river is literally your ancestor, then if you come along and do a nature-based solution thing to it, it's really meaningful and it's actually a political thing. So I'd love for people to think about that. I do think it's really important that urban nature-based solutions are thought of more and are strengthened. Most people on many of the islands do actually live in urban settings, and there's huge rates of urbanisation across Oceania. And mostly local people should lead. They shouldn't just be stakeholders. And I suppose, yeah, finally, it would be great if there was more strategic coordination for effectiveness about nature-based solutions across the region so that there's less duplication of effort and kind of wasting of those funding dollars.
Mm-hmm. Great. Lorraine and Dave, add to those points. Let's make this constructive action points forward.
Okay, well, my quick 2 cents worth is make use of the fora that exist. The PERT, Pacific Island Roundtable, it has a nature-based solution component. That's available, that's there for people to contact. I'm sure Ludo can stick up the website for that. And I think there's also under the Pippin project through IUCN that MFAT are funding, we're looking at developing more of a community of practice around nature-based solutions through that. So make use of the fora that are being developed or are already developed. I think all nature-based solutions people are nice people, so we're all approachable. So please approach us.
Thanks, Dave. And Lorraine.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Just a quick one. I thought what Dave had mentioned earlier about breaking the cycle, we really have to start convincing government that you need to move away from. It's not only about infrastructure development, but we also need to consider NbS an option for what's happening around us if we have to be in existence as Pacific Islands over the centuries. And, as Pacific Islanders, we all have the oceans that connect our islands. Hence, we already have that strong foundations of partnership. I think government should really be talking to each other at that level. We've really got to find a way where we can champion a government in a country to sort of take lead on NbS. If Tuvalu could say, that the island is vulnerable to climate change, so can we also have a Pacific Island advocate NbS and sort of take this out into world global meetings that's happening. I think, like I said, we've already got a lot of work that's happening on the ground. It's about time that the government start recognizing the important work that communities are doing and sort of work with them to sort of elevate that and change policies and change in the work that we think and in the way that we do things. Thank you.
What a wonderful way to close out this panel. I really loved all of your points. Thank you. Thank you, Sesemani. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Maybrick and Dave. Ludo, I'm going to hand back over to you to sum up everything that we've heard today. Yeah, the hard task. They did it quite well at the end, though, I think.
I'm not sure what would be my added value. I'm only supportive of what has been said. Thank you so much, panel member, for your great, insightful input. That's really great. I think we could have this discussion going on, but that's something we could keep in mind to organize further discussion like this. And thank you, Eddie, for being a great facilitator for this panel discussion. Much appreciated. In terms of the Pacific Island Roundtable NbS Working Group, Rakeshni, just like Rakeshni was our secretary of the working group, just pasted in the chat some information regarding the working group. So feel free to contact either me or her or through the website if you're interested in joining this working group. We're running out of time a little bit, so I don't see any question in the chat. So I think we will go ahead with the outro speech, trying to capture some of these insightful inputs. So today's dialogue confirms that what many of us know already is that nature-based solutions are not only relevant, but essential for the Pacific. They represent powerful means of connecting climate resilience, biodiversity, and sustainable development, while grounding our actions in community, culture, and ecosystem. I think that's very important. The discussion has brought forward a number of valuable insights, like I said earlier, a clear signal from across our diverse stakeholders, panel member base about where we should focus our energy next. So where do we go from here? So we need to translate evidence into action. This report has helped map the landscape of NbS across the Pacific. It gives us a baseline, but also a springboard. The next step is clear to us, is to turn these insights into concrete actions at all levels. Whether it's a policy alignment, integrated project design, or local community partnership, we now have the evidence and recommendation to guide us. We also must build on enabling environment. We've heard today how important it is to address structural barriers, from fragmented planning to limited financing instruments to the need for tailored capacity building. And as Sesemani said earlier, and I more than agree with you, Sesemani, there is no one-size-fits-all model. But we can share tools, we can co-develop Pacific-specific guidance and strengthen supportive institutions across sectors and increase collaboration. We have to connect and collaborate as Pacific communities. This came through strongly today, the need for more regular space for exchange. You're right, Martin, it's making the efforts to be there, to contribute to them as well. And as a co-chair of the NbS Working Group, I'm committed to continuing this conversation through learning events, maybe regional dialogues and community of practice format. NbS are cross-cutting by nature, and our approach must reflect that. We also need and we must empower local communities as leaders. I think that has been said strongly. Crucially, at the heart of sustainable NbS are the communities. We must work with, not only for them. Communities are not just beneficiaries of NbS, they are the knowledge holders, the frontline responders, and long-term stewards of land and sea. If we want NbS to be sustainable, we must ensure that communities are co-designers and co-implementers of these solutions. That means investing in participatory process, strengthening customary governance systems, and giving communities a space and resource to lead. It also means acknowledging the traditional knowledge and lived experience are equally important as scientific and technical inputs. And finally, we need to make NbS part of everyday decisions. Mainstreaming NbS is about changing how we approach development. Mainstreaming NbS means embedding nature-based thinking into how we plan infrastructure, safeguard livelihoods, manage land and sea, and finance development as well. It's not about doing something new, it's about doing things differently with nature as a partner and communities as our closest allies. Again, this report made possible through MFAT flexible and co-investment is not just a summary of what has been done. We made it as a strategic tool to guide what needs to happen next, and it belongs to us all now who are here today. Before I close, let me offer one final reflection, a personal reflection. It's time we reverse the way we value nature. Too often, nature is only valued when extracted, degraded, or converted, when forests are logged, reefs are mined, or coastline developed. But protecting nature is always cheaper than restoring it. Prevention is not just wiser, it's more cost-effective than repairing. We must start valuing nature for what it sustains, not just what it yields. And nowhere is more true than in the Pacific, where nature is deeply woven into identity, culture, food system, and livelihood. For Pacific communities, healthy ecosystems are not a luxury, they are a foundation, it's a way of life. This is why community ownership and leadership are essential. When community drives the protection and stewardship of the natural resources, the solutions are more resilient, more equitable, and more enduring. Having said that, I would like to remind you that the report is now available for download. We encourage you to read it, share it, and bring it into your work. The record of this webinar will be uploaded on SPC YouTube channel by the end of the week, so we invite you to share it with colleagues who may not have been able to attend. Thank you again for being part of this milestone moment for nature-based solution in the Pacific. Thanks again, panelists, and everyone who contributed to this report. And let's continue this journey together with purpose, partnership, and with nature at the center. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and let me wish you a good reading. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again. I pasted my email address in the chat for anyone who would like to contact me personally. I will be more than happy to answer you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and have a good reading.